Hundreds of arrows split the sky, dimming the sun. They arced and fell, dropping like sky eels upon their prey. Amaram's soldiers raised shields, but not Kaladin's squads. No shields for them. Sen screamed, and the arrows slammed into the middle ranks of Amaram's army behind him. I want to figure out what exactly makes up Brandon Sanderson's style. Based on what he has said himself about his style is that he tries to make it like clear glass window, to make it seem as invisible as possible.
The glass is not there to obscure. Other types of prose are described like stained glass windows. This is basically the concept of poetry. I try for this. It's much more of a craftsman style than an artist style of writing.
So, is it really invisible? Is it possible to have a style that's invisible? And what exactly makes up Brandon Sanderson's style? I will be dissecting a short passage from The Way of Kings. This is the first book in the Stormlight Archive series. I am looking at chapter 1 of part 1. We're following a character, a brand new character in the story called Sen, who is experiencing battle for the first time and falls under the leadership of a character known only to us as Kaladin Stormblessed. Sen didn't even know who the enemy was. A landlord was encroaching on Bright Lord Amaram's territory, the land owned ultimately by High Prince Sadius. It was a border skirmish, and Sen thought it was another Alethi princedom. Why were they fighting each other? Perhaps the king would have put a stop to it, but he was on the Shattered Plains seeking vengeance for the murder of King Gavilar 5 years before. The enemy had a lot of archers. Sen's panic climbed to a peak as the first wave of arrows flew into the air. He stumbled again, itching to take out his shield, but Dalit grabbed his arm and yanked him forward. Hundreds of arrows split the sky, dimming the sun. They arced and fell, dropping like sky eels upon their prey. Amaram's soldiers raised shields, but not Kaladin's squads. No shields for them. Sen screamed, and the arrows slammed into the middle ranks of Amaram's army behind him. Sen glanced over his shoulder, still running. The arrows fell behind him. Soldiers screamed, arrows broke against shields. Only a few straggling arrows landed anywhere near the front ranks. Why? He yelled at Dalit. How did you know? They want the arrows to hit where the men are most crowded, the large man replied, where they'll have the greatest chance of finding a body. So I'm going to be breaking down Sanderson's writing style into 5 qualities that really stand out in his writing, that really give it a personality and a style. Everyday language, the M dash, sentence fragments and repetition, gerunds, and questions and answers. The first point, Brandon Sanderson uses everyday language. He's writing on epic proportions, yet he grounds it with everyday, modern, regular language. When he's trying to describe an army and they have a huge amount of archers, he just says, the enemy had a lot of archers, right? Another writer might describe it with much more visual detail. He just had a lot of archers. Along with the everyday language is that there are few similes and metaphors, and when they occur, they are very brief and aren't usually there to create some kind of flowery picture. For example, this simile right here, they arced and fell, dropping like sky eels upon their prey. For us starting the book, that image is not completely helpful because, well, we can kind of picture what a sky eel might look like. It is more for world building than it is for describing the arrows. We know how arrows fall, we know how arrows look, so what's the point of going into an elaborate simile or metaphor right there? It's really effective because it puts us in this strange, interesting world, and also the word sky eels is very evocative on its own, so why put in more work than you necessarily have to? So the second point, and this is something I noticed occurred quite frequently in Brandon's writing, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the everyday modern language, modern sounding writers will use the M dash more frequently. So what's the M dash? It's just the N dash but longer, right? It's just a hyphen but longer. Usually it's used to replace a comma and to make it more just visually separated from a sentence. So you have a long sentence, dependent clauses and all this stuff, and you want to pull out a certain piece of information, or if it's an aside, you can use this too. Brandon will use it to add clarity. The M dash really just helps organize the information in a sentence. Brandon uses really simple everyday sentence structure. The M dash helps him do that. For example, a landlord was encroaching on Bright Lord Amaram's territory. the land owned ultimately by High Prince Sadius. In some ways, that's better than a comma because it really puts significance on the exposition, High Prince Sadius. It's owned ultimately by High Prince Sadius. Also, it just looks and feels better because he already has the ultimately there in commas. I think that looks a little better, and I think it sounds better too. The next thing, stylistic quirk that Sanderson uses, he uses lots of sentence fragments along with repetition. You'll find this a lot in important scenes, emotional scenes. Instead of going into wordy descriptions of feelings or things, he'll repeat phrases or add a sentence fragment. I'm not saying one is more effective than the other, and a lot of people would criticize Sanderson for using this, maybe thinking it's shallow or something. I think that it can be a really effective thing, especially for the style he's going for, which is peeled back. Amaram's soldiers raised shields, but not Kaladin's squad. No shields for them. Sen screamed, and the arrows slammed into the middle ranks of Amaram's army. But not Kaladin's squad, no shields for them. Helps with the pace, right? It helps, and it's very colloquial, it's very conversational. It helps bring urgency to the moment. And having that period there, just but not Kaladin's squad, added emphasis. Kaladin's squad, no shields for them. This is important to the scene. It's important that they don't have shields. It's significant. There are more obvious examples. This is just very early in the story, so it's easier to use. There's a lot of this repetition. Next point, and this is one that I love, gerunds, basically. What are they, right? Gerunds are just the present participle of verbs, but they're used like nouns. So hitting, running, ing words used in a certain way, used like a noun. For example, he stumbled again, itching to take out his shield. Hundreds of arrows split the sky, dimming the sun. They arced and fell, dropping like sky eels upon their prey. Basically, this is just also saving word space, which Brandon's really good at doing. He's really good at being really economical with his words on the page. This also lends a sense of urgency. Sounds like present tense. It's running, but it's in the past tense. And I think he's mentioned this in lectures, how using that gerund like that and adding it to the end of a sentence can really add a sense of momentum. You know, hundreds of arrows split the sky. They dimmed the sun. Different than hundreds of arrows split the sky, dimming the sun. Feels more present, feels more active, and it just sounds a little smoother, right? This is, very common thing. I just feel like it's not very scientific, but I do feel like he uses this quite often, and he'll often jump back and forth between using a sentence that will have that gerund and using one that won't. And the final thing I want to get to is the constant questioning that his point of view characters do. A tool for exposition, basically. And it's really effective. Why were they fighting each other? Perhaps the king would have to put a stop to it, but he was on the Shattered Plains seeking vengeance for the murder of King Gavilar 5 years before. Okay, we have a character asking a normal question, and then perhaps, right, it's connect us to the prologue to the book, just also giving this exposition and reminding us about how much time has passed since the prologue. It's been 5 years. And not only internally does Brandon Sanderson do this, but of course he does it in the dialogue when Sen asks Dalit, how did you know about the arrows? And he gives the answer, That is a little more common and probably typical for exposition. Brandon's just very good at using those internal mechanisms to get exposition across. So, after looking at all these qualities of his writing, obviously there's a lot you could pick apart and dissect and try to figure out, but after looking at these things, does Brandon Sanderson have a prominent style? Yeah, I do think that he has a style. It's a style that doesn't try to stick out in certain ways, but it does stick out in others, right? It sticks out in its use of sentence fragments, of repetition of certain phrases, italics for particular words for emphasis. So there is a style there, but yeah, it doesn't reveal much beyond what Brandon Sanderson wants to reveal. It's very to the point and it's very economical. These are long books. The reason they expand so much has more to do with scene construction than it does with the prose style. It's not invisible. I don't think any writer's style is invisible. The question is if it's effective and good. I think that really comes down to the reader. I think largely it doesn't get in the way of the story. I think the story gets in the way of the story sometimes. I think that writers can learn a lot from this style because Sanderson excels at what a lot of writers don't, which is getting to the point, cleaning up the prose and getting down to the very essential stuff. Yeah, what does everybody think about Brandon Sanderson's style? Is it obnoxious? Is it noticeable? Or does it feel invisible as you read? I'm really curious to see what everyone thinks. Like and subscribe as usual. Hang out a while, watch some videos. That's all that's it.